Chapter 11: The Later Middle Ages.
And now for something completely different.
Part 3: Challenges to the Church and Social Unrest. These periods of the 1300s is categorized by major upheaval within the Catholic Church, the one church in Western Christendom at the time. With the death of Pope Boniface VIII, there was an effort to control the church and its policies by the King of France, Philip the Fair. He pressured the new Pope Clement V to settle permanently in Avignon, which is in southeastern France. The popes lived in Avignon from 1309 to 1376, a period in church history often called the Babylonian captivity, referring to the 70 years the ancient Hebrews were held captive in Mesopotamia and Babylon. The Babylonian captivity cut off church leadership from its historic roots and source of its ancient authority, Rome, which badly damaged papal prestige. In 1377, Pope Gregory XI brought the papal court back to Rome, but he died shortly after his return. The next pope, Urban VI, pontificate 1378 to 1389, was a distinguished administrator and had excellent intentions for church reforms, but he went about in a tactless and bullheaded manner. He attacked clerical luxury, denouncing by name and threatening with individual excommunication cardinals and bishops, who then slipped away from Rome and met in Avignon. The cardinals declared Urban's election invalid because it had come about under threats from the Roman mob, and they excommunicated him and elected a new pope, Clement VII, pontificate 1784 to 1794. The two popes, Urban at Rome and Clement VIII VII at Avignon, began the Great Schism that divided Western Christendom until 1417. The powers of Europe aligned themselves with Urban or Clement along strictly political lines. France, Aragon, Castile, Portugal, Scotland, and later on the Italian city-states supported the French Pope, Clement. England and the German Emperor, longtime enemies of France, recognized Urban. The schism weakened the religious faith of many Christians and brought church leadership into serious disrepute.
What's that?
War were declared.
So war actually wasn't the final outcome of all these challenges, but what did happen was that a number of people felt comfortable really criticizing the Catholic Church for the first time in its history. William of Ockham was a Franciscan friar and philosopher who saw the papal court at Avignon firsthand and argued vigorously against the papacy. Occam asserted that governments should have limited powers and be accountable to those they govern, and church and state should be separate. The Italian lawyer and university official Marsiglio of Padua agreed with Occam, claiming in his defense of Pass, the defender of peace, that the state was the great unifying power in society and that the church should be subordinate to it. These conciliarists believed that reform of the church could best be achieved through periodic assemblies or councils composed of clergy, theologians, and lay people representing all Christian people. The English scholar and theologian John Wycliffe went even further, arguing that Scripture alone should be the standard of Christian belief and practice, and that papal claims of secular power had no foundation in the Scriptures. Wycliffe wanted Christians to read the Bible for themselves and produce the first complete translation of the Bible into English. A university theologian in Prague, Jan Hus, built on Wycliffe's ideas. Hus also denied papal authority, called for translation of the Bible into the local Czech language, and declared indulgences, papal offers of remissions of penance useless.
Oh, look at me. I'm making people happy. I'm the magical man from Happy Land in a gumdrop house on Lollipop Lane.
In response to continued calls throughout Europe for a council to resolve the schism, the cardinals of Rome and Avignon assembled a council at Pisa in 1409, which failed to do anything except make matters worse by selecting a third pope. Finally, a great council met at the imperial city of Constance, 1414 to 1418, with three objectives: to end the schism, to reform the church, and to wipe out heresy. The council moved first on the last point. Despite being granted a safe conduct to go to Constance by the emperor, Jan Hus was tried, condemned, and burned at the stake as a heretic in 1415. The council also eventually healed the schism by deposing both the Roman Pope and the successor Pope chosen at Pisa, isolating the Avignon anti-pope, and calling a conclave that elected a new Pope, Martin V, pontificate 1417 to 1431. Martin proceeded to dissolve the council, and nothing was done about reform. The schism and the conciliar movement had exposed the need for reform, however, laying the foundation for the great reforms efforts of the 16th century.
Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg.
The failings of the Avignon papacy and the scandal of the Great Schism weakened the spiritual mystique of the clergy in the popular mind. Lay Christian men and women often formed confraternities, voluntary lay groups organized by occupation, devotional preference, neighborhood, or charitable activity. Some confraternities prayed for souls in purgatory, and others held dances, festivals, and collections to raise money for church repairs, supplies, and liturgical objects. All, however, often carried out their devotional practices without a priest. Most confraternitaries were composed of men, but some women confraternitaries were formed usually to oversee the production of vestments and altar clothes. In Holland, beginning in the late 14th century, a group of pious laypeople called the Brethren and Sisters of the Common Life lived in stark simplicity, while daily carrying out the gospel teaching of feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and visiting the sick. The Brethren's goal of making religion a personal inner experience was best articulated by the Dutch monk Thomas à Kempis in The Imitation of Christ, which urged Christians to take Christ as their model, seek perfection in a simple way of life, and look to scriptures for guidance in living a spiritual life. The confraternitaries and mystics were generally not considered heretical unless they began to challenge the authority of the papacy, the way the conciliarists such as Wycliffe and Huss had. The movement of lay piety, however, altered many perceptions of their own spiritual powers. The difficult conditions of the 14th and 15th centuries spurred a wave of peasant revolts across Europe, the first of which was a large-scale rebellion in Flanders.
Marguerite, I leave to fight in Flanders. Stupid Flanders.
In the 1320s. In 1358, the frustrations of French peasants over oppressive taxes, the criminal banditry of the countryside, losses on the battlefield, and the general misery exploded in a massive uprising called the Jacquerie, after a mythical agricultural laborer, Jacques Bonhomme Goodfellow. In England, when the Black Death drastically cut the labor supply, peasants demanded higher wages and fewer manorial obligations, to which the Lords responded in 1351 with the Statute of Laborers, a law freezing wages and binding workers to their manors. The statute could not be enforced, and peasants' economic grievances, along with the government's lack of protection during the war, aristocratic violence, and agitation by the popular preacher John Ball, fueled a revolt. In 1381, when the Royal Council reimposed a tax on all adult males, peasants revolted in major uprisings known as the English Peasants' Revolt, involving thousands of people. The boy king Richard II met the leaders of the revolt, agreeing to charters ensuring peasants' freedom, tricked them with false promises, and then crushed the uprisings with terrible ferocity. The English peasant revolt did not bring social equality to England, but nobles were unsuccessful in their attempts to restore serfs' labor obligations. Thus, rural serfdom continued to decline, disappearing in England by 1550.
Race cars, lasers, aeroplanes, it's a duck blur. Might solve a mystery or rewrite history.
In the fourth and final part, we will talk about some of the other conflicts that were occurring in the 14th century.